Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're bringing you a review of an upcoming game from Origins. This one is Arena for the Gods from Iello Games. It is a 2 to 6 player combat style game that derives itself a little bit from King of Tokyo.
A little bit, for sure. I mean, there's definitely the dice rolling and re-rolling, although it's not exactly the same as King of Tokyo in that respect. But it also mixes in a ton of tactical and strategic maneuvering around a board. I mean, it's a gladiatorial arena, and you are trying to kill one another.
Yeah, exactly. There's a game board in the center. The game board's going to be set up according to whatever's in the back of the rule book. You have traps. These will do damage to the players. You have some tile traps as well that can do damage. You have fountains of life that will give health back when players land on it or move through it. And then, of course, you have the characters, which will be laid out on the board. We'll get into that, how that sets up in a moment. You have a cool little bowl here.
Yep.
This houses all the extra life and the exhaustion tokens and the protection tokens, so they're easy for players to grab and pick up.
Yeah, I feel like this is a trend. We've seen a couple games now, just in the last month, that came with their own bowl or bowls of sorts.
There is a player screen. The player screen will hide the player's health, because once a player has no health left, that signifies the end of a game. On the back of the player screen, though, you have a bunch of different dice combinations. These are generic and can be used by any of the players. However, your typical dice rolls from the 7 different dice you'll be rolling are keyed off of the cards. This is the driving force behind the entire game. There's 4 different types of cards. You have combat cards, are your red cards. You have your movement cards, which are your green cards. You have your defensive cards, which are your blue cards. And then finally, you have your spell cards. Your spell cards, which are yellow. Each of these different cards will allow you to do different types of things within the game, and you're going to be drafting these in the very first phase of the game called the equipment phase.
Yeah, it's really cool. The equipment phase, you're going to start with the combat cards, and they're going to equal to the number of players. You're going to lay some cards on the board, and there's going to be a draft. Now, this is how it works, though. The very life that you're given at the beginning of the game is what you're going to use to do a sort of blind bid for the cards. So everyone takes some amount of their life in their hand, holds it out, reveals at the same time. Whoever has the most gets first choice of their card, and so on. Now, if there's a tie, there can be some negotiation, some discussion. So if Jeremy and I, for instance, tied, we could say, well, I really wanted this. Did you wanted this one? Okay, we can agree on that. If you can't agree, then you shuffle all the cards up that are available at that time and randomly take a couple.
Not good.
Not necessarily good. It could be awesome, but not necessarily good. So it gives you a little taste of forging alliances, which will happen from time to time throughout the entire game.
Yep. And you're going to draft them in that very specific order. You're going to draft your combat cards, your mounts or your movement cards, your defense cards, and then finally your spells. Whoever wins the whoever has the highest bid on your spell cards is going to be the first player through the combat phase. Now, it needs to be noted that this draft is the only time that you'll be able to get cards, and each player will go into the combat phase with one of each of those cards.
Yeah, this is basically, imagine this is your equipment that you're gathering for the arena combat.
Yes.
This is what you're taking in. If this doesn't get the job done, you're dead.
Yes.
So you got to draft wisely. This is one of those games where you got to look at the cards. You don't want to draft all 4 cards that all use the exact same icon from the dice, because it's just not going to work out well. You want a little bit of a variety. Some of the cards also, in their abilities, definitely synergize better with one another or not. So you want to take that into consideration. So oftentimes you'll see people bid pretty heavy on a couple and maybe a little less on some. Or you go really heavy all the time, get the exact cards you wanted, but then you're going to be entering the arena with very little life.
Once players are done drafting, they're going to seed the board, starting with the player who bid highest on the spell card. He will take his standee and place it anywhere around the edge of the board. Then each player in turn order will do the same, and then you're going to start the actual game itself. The game is very simple to be played. You just take the 7 dice, you roll them, and then you are allowed to pick any of those and then roll the other ones once more. Then you have to assign your dice to your cards or to any of the abilities on the back of your player screen. Now, let's talk about the anatomy of a card itself. In the upper left-hand portion, you have what type of card it is. In the bottom left-hand portion, you have what empowers that card in order to use the ability on it. For instance, this card here requires 1 shield and 1 movement. Now, you can power up those cards as many times as you want on your turn, as long as you have a different set of dice for each of those times that you empower it.
Exactly. If you roll well, you can go heavy with your really strong ability, perhaps. And then there's other cards too. I mean, we can't go into the laundry list of all the differences between the cards, but some of them are going to allow additional rerolls.
Yep.
Some of them allow to break basically a lot of the rules that would generally govern the game.
Yep. So what will you be doing on your turn? You'll be attacking players, you'll be pushing players, pulling players around the arena trying to damage them. If you push a player, you can push them one space away from you. If you push them off of the player board, they take 1 damage. If you push them onto a trap, they take 1 damage. If you push them into another player, they take 1 damage, and the player they got pushed into takes 1 damage.
Yeah, it sets up nice little potential chains that you could see evolve on the board where you can shove one person and do damage to everybody.
Players can also move across the board. If they move onto one of the fountains, they'll take 1 of the health and place it behind their screen. And there's no requirements on how you move. If you're moving 4 times, you can move back and forth, back and forth. You don't have to continue within a straight line. You can move through whatever spaces are available to you. Once you are done, you'll take the dice and give them to the next player on your left. Now, there's some other types of tokens within the game. You have protection tokens, and then you have exhaustion tokens. Protection tokens will actually be placed onto the top of your standee, and these will give you an ability for protection for the entire round until it comes back to you.
Yeah, and that's the key. The fact that it lasts the entire round is really cool, because a lot of those things, once you get hit, they usually disappear.
Yep.
But in this game, they last the whole round, and what's even cooler is it's not just pure defense necessarily. Yeah. A lot of the cards that will trigger off of if you're protected and you take damage and you get hit, then something happens.
Yep.
You either counterattack or you're able to swing around and pull them or something like that. So it really adds to the same basic movement and attacking that the game already has.
A lot of the abilities in the cards, too, also provide exhaustion. For instance, I have a card here in front of me that when it attacks and hits somebody, I can give them 1 exhaustion token. Now, the exhaustion tokens actually get placed onto a player's player screen, and they can have as many of these as possible.
It can be very painful.
And what they do is that on their turn, if they start with any exhaustion tokens, they're going to roll 1 less die for however many tokens they have. However, those tokens will go away
as soon as they roll.
As soon as they roll.
And there are some ways to mitigate that as well. Like I said, there's cards that do all sorts of things. One of the cards I had even allowed me to, if I powered it, re-roll some of the dice that I wasn't allowed to roll in the first place if I'd had exhaustion on me.
Yep. Players are going to keep taking these steps around and around the table until one player has no more life behind their player screen.
Right, and they're obligated to show that, of course.
Yes.
You have to reveal when you have no life, and then it is simply who has the most life left, they are the winner.
Yep.
In the free-for-all variant of the game.
Yeah, and the game can also be played in 2 other type of modes. You can have team play, which 2 versus 2, or 3 versus 3, and then you can have a Titan mode, which 1 player plays as a Titan. In that game, the player will start with 10 life per number of players, and then each of the players that are trying to defeat him will start with just 10 life. Some things that we can talk about the game too is the artwork. The artwork is absolutely fantastic. Now you'll see on some of these cards,
look at that.
They went above and beyond just the graphic design. A lot of companies will, they'll make a template for the card, they'll throw the artwork in there, and they'll be done. A lot of this artwork has cool little touches for each of the different styles of artwork that's used on it. You have dogs biting through the actual border of the thing. You have some Chinese letters here written. You have the mummies wraps coming off of the cards.
Shadowing, these things that basically they're using art in a way that interacts with the graphic design.
Yes.
Which is something I can't imagine a game that I wouldn't suggest the designers do that with. It really makes these cards come to life and give them a depth like nothing else. I mean, these rocks literally look like they're sort of floating out away from the card. It's beautiful, beautiful design. Now, this artwork is the kind of artwork that appeals to Jeremy and myself.
Yeah.
It's yellow, so it's got that sort of slightly more cartoony, family-friendly look, but we love that, and they really nailed it with these cards.
The other thing I'll say is that the single-player game, it can boil down to one player getting picked on. The multiplayer game, when you have teams, is a very good variant to that, because you'll have teams synergizing what they're drafting and then working together to try to take down one character while the other team is doing the same. So there's a lot more opportunity there. Plus, in a team game, once one of the players dies, the other team can still win, because what you're doing is once one player dies, you all reveal what's left over, and if that other player from the team that lived has more health than the combined of the other players, they win. And we played that game, and it came very close to that happening a couple times.
Very close. We defeated our friends Gary and Ryan, and one of them was out of health, obviously. I think Gary had health left, and he was
15 to 16, yeah.
15 to 16. So he came very close to beating us, even though there were 2 of us left, which is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
Like the idea of us defeating one teammate, but that team still winning, is a really, really cool possibility.
Yeah, and it's not always luck driven as well. Of course, what you roll, you're going to have to use your abilities, but this helps as well. Having abilities that are generic and can be used by any players helps with the mitigation of not picking the right or not drafting correctly at the start of the game. So, Arena for the Gods, I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. I'd say if you are a fan of games like King of Tokyo, games like Ultimate Warriors, if you've ever played that, things like that, this is a no-brainer for sure. And even if you haven't played those games or those are not in your wheelhouse, you should definitely give this one a try because it's got quite a bit more layered strategy and tactics going on. So
check this one out. It's coming out of Origins. If you guys have questions about the game, make them in the comments below. We'll answer them for you. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and everything else that we do here, Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 1 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored by our friends at TMG Games. And at Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.